Sorry, I forgot to say that our staff member. Are you impugning my hostess?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay. John Charles of our staff, who is a super fan of both the authors, is actually going to be conducting this conversation. So we're excited about that. And this is Ruth's first visit to the Poison Pen. Yay. And Stuart is here on a night when it's not 115 because his last visit was in July. So it'll be a whole nice, better experience for him.
Am I okay here? Are you happy with that?
You're the queen, so tell me.
I'm sorry, you've got a foot in the face. I shouldn't. That was very rude of me, wasn't it? Immediately, just how do you feel about this?
Just
Apologies.
make yourself comfortable, Stu. Don't mind the rest of us.
Hello, hello.
I think we're virtual and live. We'd like to thank those here attending the event, those virtually. When Barbara asked me if I'd like to do this, I practically had to beat her down to get through the door because I can't remember two authors who are more fiendishly clever than Ruth and Stuart.
Oh.
So I'd like to start by asking you
Just
both.
look how British we got about that. We
We
were
were
like,
really uncomfortable.
well, clever. I don't think so.
Now we're going to prove how unfiendishly clever we are with our answers.
Yeah,
but
We'll get to that. But let's start with both of you wanted to be writers early on, but you took a roundabout way getting there. Can you kind of describe what took you so long to write your first book? Stuart or Ruth?
Gosh, well, so I actually didn't take that long to write my first book. I did take a very long time to publish my first book. Writing, I started quite early with kind of little stories that got longer and longer. And I wrote my first kind of, I won't say book because that gives it credit, which it is not really due. But my one of my English teachers, when I was about 11 or 12, said, I'm going to give you a piece of homework for your summer. You can just go away, write a story, anything you like, be creative, and I will mark it when you get back. And I was like, challenge accepted. So I went away and wrote a binder full of handwritten lined paper, came back in September, banged it down on her desk, and the poor woman's face, I instantly knew. I was like, this was not what she was hoping for. Just sort of see her going, well done, Ruth. And I'm absolutely certain she didn't read it. But anyway, that was the first of many handwritten, very long manuscripts, which I wrote and promptly put straight under the bed. And yeah, it took me until my 30s and having kids before I was in the library and I was on maternity leave with my second baby, and we're very lucky in the UK to have quite long maternity leaves. So I had about 6 months and had another 3 or 4 months left. And I had this great idea for a book. And as Stu knows, I was like, I'm due back at work in a few months, and I am not going to have time to do anything, let alone write this, great idea that's boiling in the back of my head. And I thought the only way I am going to be able to write this is if I sell it to a publisher and get enough money to earn enough for a day's childcare, basically. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to keep on writing. And it was that kind of use it or lose it impetus that made me get off my butt and start submitting to publishers. And here we are, hooray. What about you, Stu? I've got a feeling your story probably doesn't involve a boring maternity leave and sitting in the library with your kids.
No, it doesn't. My story is a bit more straightforward. I went to study law at university and then realised that by studying law at university, I would doom myself to being surrounded by lawyers for the rest of my life.
We've probably got a few lawyers in the audience. I think you should pick your word
You're very
carefully
different to UK lawyers. UK lawyers are truly terrible people. So I quit that. And then I went and studied English and philosophy, which is basically training for unemployment, is what that is. Like, you're not going to nobody gets a job with that degree. So I left university, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I had no idea. So I went travelling instead, because that's what you do when you don't know what to do with yourself. And I went travelling, and I was supposed to be away for 3 months, and I went away for 5 years. Like, I just never came home. Yeah, no, that's the noise my mum made as well. She was like, this year? And I'm like, probably not. But so obviously I had to pay my bills. I ran out of money very quickly. And what I worked out was that, especially in South America, every town had a newspaper, and every newspaper had like a couple of paragraphs, half a page or a page of English language news at the back for the expats. So because I was like 20, I would just walk into the office and be like, hey, I'm English. Can I write that? And they're like, no, you're not a journalist. But occasionally they would be like, yes, you can go and do it. So that's what I did. I got around South America by writing these little articles for people. And I had a few pennies, and that would pay for me to go on to the next place. So after 5 years of that, I finally realised that all my friends were being adults and buying houses and had jobs and things. And I was just this scruffy backpacker with a wild look in his eye. And I came home, and the only skill I had at that point was that I'd written these articles. So I started applying for internships on newspapers. And then before I knew it, I was a journalist. And writing a book's kind of like, all journalists have half a book in a drawer somewhere. It's just the natural evolution of that. So I'd always wanted to write an Agatha Christie novel. I didn't have a very good idea for it. And then so just put it in the back burner for a decade and just live my life. And then I had the idea when I was working in Dubai. So I was flying somewhere, had the idea, just came to me, and I quit everything to write the book. And that's sort of my story. It's a bit random. Yeah.
What would you like readers to know about your new book?
That it's very cheap, and you should all buy 5 of them.
Excellent value.
Yeah, excellent value. Ruth, you've probably got a better answer for this.
I don't know. The thing is, it's really hard writing crime because you kind of don't want people to know anything about your book. And actually, One Perfect Couple is a little bit easier to talk about. But my previous book, 0 Days, ended with a big reveal at the end of the first chapter, which was that the main character's husband died. And when I wrote it, I sort of imagined this as this kind of slap in the face for readers. And of course, what you don't take into account is this is going to be on the blurb.
Yeah.
But a few readers did read it without reading the blurb and were absolutely devastated, which was obviously the reaction I was hoping for. So I hope there's probably a few devastating moments in One Perfect Couple. Yeah. Do you want us to do the kind of elevator pitch? Shall we be good authors and sum up our books?
Oh, God.
Okay, I'll do mine first, and then you can
spend 4 hours doing mine.
Yours. You've got the bigger challenge. Mine, I write books that are very easy to sum up, which is the secret hack of authoring. So it's Murder on a Desert Island. Over to Stu. No, okay, it's a bit longer. My main character, Lila, is a scientist, and she's come to a kind of crunch point in her career and in her relationship. And her partner, Nico, is an aspiring actor. He's kind of getting to the point where if he doesn't make it now, he maybe never will. So one day he comes home with this amazing news. He's been invited to go on a reality TV show, which is going to make or break his career. There is just one problem, which is that the concept for the show is that it's a couples TV show. So would Lila like to come on this TV show with him? And the answer is very much not. But as a good girlfriend, she eventually does say yes. So they jet off to this beautiful island in the Indian Ocean. It's white sands, turquoise sea, little Maldivian villas. There's a few kind of rough edges. You can literally still smell the wet paint. Some of the infrastructure isn't there, but Lila's there. She's not going to fly 17 hours back. The first night there's a horrific storm. The crew, who are all staying on a boat because there's no room for them on the island, are swept off course. And the next day the contestants wake up to find that the island's infrastructure has been destroyed. There's no food, there's no fresh water because the desalination plant has been destroyed. And at that point, Lila starts to realise that someone on the island is playing this game for real, and they are determined to survive at all costs, no matter if that means life or death for the other contestants. Now over to Stu.
No, but we have to meet that with a audience mandated ooh. Can I get an audience mandated ooh? That's better. Play your part, people. Come on. She's just sat there looking at us. Yeah, so mine is also set on an island. Me and Ruth discussed this 3 years ago that we're going all our novels now will have the same setting.
I plagiarised you for all of us, yeah.
we just. But so mine is set 90 years after the world has ended. So everyone died. You all died. Everyone you loved died. I'm so sorry about that. But I'm dead as well. 122 people have survived and they're living on a small Greek island, right? And it is a perfect life. There's no murder anymore. There's no violence. There's no hatred. No one's died. There's not even been any pushing and shoving for 90 years. It's a utopia. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. There are some oddities on the island. The fog that killed everyone else on the planet is still there, and it's been held back from the island by these barriers that are up around the island. So they can constantly see this thing that could kill them. They have a voice in their head that's always talking to them. It can hear their thoughts. It's always chatting to them, encouraging them to be selfless and kind. And they are selfless and kind. They're all wonderful. They're all beautiful, lovely people who think of other people before they think of themselves. There's a curfew. So wherever they are on the island, whatever they're doing, they fall asleep at 7:30 every night, and there's nothing they can do about that. And in the morning, at 6:30, they're woken up again, and there's nothing they can do about that either. And there's places on the island that they're not allowed to go to. So there are mysteries abound on the island, but it is a utopia, and they're all very, very happy until one moment, and you've got to, I want your roux ready, okay? Warm it up. One morning, they wake up from their curfew, their sleep, and one of them has been murdered, brutally murdered, stabbed to death. Come on! Yes! Now we're on it. You are the best. Yeah, so one of them's been murdered in a place where there is no murder and there's never been a murder. So it's up to one of the islanders, one of these pure souls, to get the head around the concept of murder and then work out how you solve one and why it could possibly happen. Yeah, and that's this thing. That's Last Murder at the End of the World.
Can I just say, when I heard the concept for this book, the first thing I thought was, this sounds like the fantasy of a sleep-deprived parent.
Yeah.
Like, everybody just falls asleep at 7:30 at night.
There's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. And then, like,
I was like, I would take my kids to that island so fast.
I mean, to be honest, when my kid was 6 months old, I would have been taking the brutally murdered person as well. That would have been fine. I'll accept that.
What is it about closed settings, like an island, that makes it so appealing to you as a writer?
The tax write-off for the research payers? No. Did you go to the Maldives? Did you actually do a little bit of cheeky research?
Well, so amazingly, despite having written, so I wrote the entirety of The Woman in Cabin 10 without ever having been on a cruise or been to Norway, which is my method with most of my books. And this book, I wrote almost all of it. I wrote up to the final chapter and then went to the Maldives and was reliably informed by my accountant that because I'd already written 90% of the books, I could not write it off as a tax.
Yeah.
So that was extremely poorly planned on my part. How about you? Did you go and hang out on an island filled with mysterious fog?
Honestly, so when I was writing the books, the first book I wrote was called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. That was a Agatha Christie murder mystery, like a manor house in a Groundhog Day loop. So I went and researched that, right? And that was my Locked House book. My second one was called The Devil in the Dark Water. That was set on a boat in 1632, and they'd rebuilt the boat that was built, and that was a true story that I fictionalized. But that boat had been rebuilt by the Dutch, and I went and climbed all over that boat, so that was there. And then for this one, I was like, well, I've done a locked house, I've done a locked boat, I'm going to do a locked island, right? And
also, my process of elimination.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're doing the locked space station next. It's going to be amazing. And I was like, so I was talking to my wife, and I was like, do you know what this means? This really does mean we could probably just go and sit on a Greek island for 3 months. Like, come on, Saxman will pay for it, it'll be great. And we're like, yeah, and then the pandemic happened. So I know, thanks. Yeah, I know. So I ended up, it was a really strange experience, because I used to be a travel journalist forever and ever and ever ago. So what I ended up doing for research was revisiting my old travel articles and sort of like immersing myself in my old awesome life, and so I sat there and read through all travel articles, and that's kind of how I immerse, because I want you, every time you read one of my books, I really do want you to feel like you're there. I want you to feel like you can feel the salt on your skin, and you should be as afraid as the characters are, as happy as the characters are. You should feel the sun. And travel journalism's all about that, so that's what I had to do. I had to go back and sort of, because I was locked down like everybody else, so I wrote this book in a weird lockdown. You?
I mean, I guess it is that lockdown thing, isn't it? And I think this is basically all of my novels are free therapy for myself. And I think anyone who's read more than one of my books can probably tell that my ultimate nightmare is being trapped in a social situation with people I don't particularly like, where I can't
We're
get
right
away.
here, Ruth.
It's fine. I got my plane booked for tomorrow. No, okay, I'm kidding. But I think it's that, I don't know, I probably had some, traumatic sleepover as a child where, everyone was being mean and I just wanted to go home, and I knew my dad would be very unimpressed if I called him at 11:30 at night. I have no memory of this. I'm just being my own therapist at this point. But I think there's two reasons why I love a sort of I think we're not allowed to call them locked room because that implies murder on the rue morgue. It's closed, apparently it's closed circle. I think a big part of it is increasing that friction. If you put kind of people who don't like each other, who don't trust each other in close proximity, if you force them to kind of rub up against each other, metaphorically, I don't write those types of books, fortunately for everybody. It just, any friction, any irritation, any sort of little bit of grit in the oyster that you can introduce just makes things fundamentally more interesting. But I think also it comes back to the reason why I love writing small casts. You have, you set yourself a puzzle at the beginning of the novel, don't you? You give yourself a certain toolbox and you have to solve the problems, the plot problems that you set yourself. You have to solve the literal problem, the mystery, with the characters that you gave yourself at the beginning. And for me, that's often the biggest plot hurdle I encounter, is that it's actually not one that was an issue in One Perfect Couple, but I've sort of tied things up too well and I can't find a way for my main character to solve the mystery. And if you have a very sort of closed circle, you can't parachute in, a friendly forensics expert or someone to give a convenient, confession at the 11th hour or whatever. So I love that challenge to myself, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me it's more mechanical almost. It's like every murder. If you think about this, right? The locked room, the what did you call it? Closed circle mysteries, right? Is the stupidest way to kill a human being that's ever been invented, right? It's never happened in the history of man. No one's ever been killed that way.
Prove it.
Yeah, if you want, I've researched every murder. If you want, any one of you get sick of me, right? You can just come up here and you can stab, shoot, poison, push me off a bridge, right? Very easy to kill me. I'm very fleshy. And that's the way it's happened throughout history. But Christie and the Golden Age writers basically told us that these people were getting bumped off this way all the time. They were getting locked in rooms, then overly complicated methods of killing them were happening. They never have. So when you start with that as a writer, it's almost a very meta thing, because they've made that almost the peak of crime writing, right? It's this big, it's our Everest. Like, plotting a closed room mystery, a perfect circle mystery, is like, it is our Everest. Everyone wants to do it, even though it doesn't make any sense. So the first thing you've got to do is find a reason why anybody would be killed this way, in the most stupid way imaginable, right? It's like, oh, that person was beaten to death with a dead fish. And then you have to come up with a reason why that would have happened rather than the stabbing, shooting, bricking, right? It's as daft as that. So you've got to come up with a reason for that. So the second thing you've got to work out as well is, why didn't the murderer just leg it to Argentina straight away, right? Like, that's the second thing that should happen.
Because of the spooky fog, obviously.
The spooky fog. But that's what every book should start. Every murder mystery should start with the detective having to go to Argentina to track down the murderer. That should be first chapter of all of them. And then I got on a plane, and then there's just like, Argentina's just filled with murderers. That's what it should be. So locking them in place is just mechanical for me. Like, I need a reason why my murderer isn't immediately pissing off. I need to keep them in place. I need to keep my suspects in place. It just makes the plotting easier, even if the plotting's trickier, because it's a locked room mystery, right? So for me, that's where I always start. I'm doing it to save myself the headache of coming up with the reason why the murderer hasn't left. It's a strange... You've gone to Argentina, yeah, which is not a euphemism for anything.
I wonder what it says about our personalities, that we were both faced with the same problem, and my go-to solution was a reality TV show, and your go-to solution was a scary fog and a curfew.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just...
There's something very deep going on in the back of her.
No, I don't think mine is, though, sadly. I think mine is genuinely like, the pandemic happened, and then I roamed around telling everyone I was never going to write a pandemic book.
And then you wrote a metaphorical pandemic
Yeah, I think that's
book.
what happened. Like, everyone's locked in place, and there's a deadly thing that if they touch kills them. Like, it's like, I think I just very annoyingly wrote a pandemic book, and I didn't mean to.
One Perfect Couple is both a showing how much we love and we hate reality television. What is your own relationship to reality TV?
Well, I feel like a complete fraud every time people ask this question, but the truth is I don't really watch reality TV, which makes it all the stranger that I decided to set a book in a reality TV show. I watched the first, I guess, 2 series of Big Brother when they first came out in the UK, which was roughly when I was at university. So I was kind of perfect age for it. All my friends were addicted. I watched both series, loved it. And then I kind of drifted away from it. And I think partly it was just a time commitment thing. You know, watching reality TV shows these days is a big, you know, they have like the live cams and the podcasts and the, you know, but partly it was because I think fundamentally what I enjoyed about the early series of Big Brother, which I think is a theme that's reflected in my books, I'm fascinated by ordinary people in really weird circumstances. And those first couple of seasons were just regular ordinary people. You know, they had teachers, they had builders, they had social workers, just really normal people that you could find yourself sitting next to on the bus any day of the week. And what I realized was that as the seasons went on and as more kind of high concept reality TV shows were introduced, the people became less and less normal. They became existing reality TV stars or people who were, you know, purely in it for the fame. They want, you know, they were models or influencers or whatever it was. And fundamentally, I wasn't as interested in people who were there to be famous. I was interested in regular people finding themselves in a bizarre situation. But then a few years ago, The Traitors came out in the UK. And I know it was a big hit here, but it was a huge, huge hit in the UK. And our format was slightly different. So we didn't have any existing reality TV show stars on ours. We only had normal people. And it was a really diverse spread of normal people. It went right up to kind of pensioners. And there was, again, it was just, you could have taken a busload of people anywhere in the country and it would have been them. And I love the kind of crime adjacent format of it. You know, for anyone who hasn't watched it, the premise is that you have a group of people, there's like 20 of them. Most of them are what the show calls faithfuls, and 3 of them are what the show calls traitors, which means the faithfuls are all working together to increase the prize pot, and if they win, they share it. The traitors are secretly working against the others, and if they get through to the final, they scoop the entire pot for themselves. It doesn't matter how many faithfuls make it. If one traitor makes it, the traitor wins. So the job of the faithfuls is to figure out who the traitor is, and the job of the traitor is to conceal themselves and to try to throw suspicion on other people, which is basically one of my novels. Like, most people are nice, one person is not. Who is it, and how much of a shit are they being in the process? So all of that kind of, and the premise for the book was sort of handed to me on a plate by another writer who said, we were talking about Love Island, and I said something about, you know, it's a miracle all of the contestants don't end up murdering each other. And she said, oh, sounds like a Ruth Ware novel. And somehow this, combined with me sort of rediscovering my love of reality TV, formed itself into One Perfect Couple. Yeah. With a 20-year gap, which again proves you don't actually have to know anything about a subject to set a novel in it.
Can I just, on the subject of The Traitors, has anybody seen The Traitors? Yeah. The best.
Not many. It's very good, especially the UK season.
It's very good.
That's what everyone says.
Yeah.
The Australian one is the connoisseurs version.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. But the best thing about The Traitors is the people learning in real time before your eyes who they really are, which is like something that happens in crime all the time, but it's fucking wonderful. Like, it truly is, because they're just, like, you know, they start off just being like, I would never do that, and they're like, what about for a load of money? And they're like, yes, I would do it for a lot of money. And then you see these people just be like, And then they make these really weird assumptions about each other, right? Because they're like, well, I think that person's a traitor because I think they're a bit of a bastard. And you're like, well, you haven't even taken the things out the bag yet. You don't know. You just think that person's a bastard.
That's what I loved about it, was the fact that everybody goes into it thinking they're really intelligent, intuitive people who can spot a wrong and at 50 paces. You quickly learn people have no clue when other people are lying to them, and you, the viewer, know. And what you learn is actually it's the honest people who are immediately eliminated because they say what they really think. And guess what? People don't like being told what you really think. They want to hear what they want to hear. And the traitors, by and large, were very sort of empathetic, very emotionally intelligent people who were very good at telling people what they wanted to hear. And so, anyway, we weren't here to talk about the traitors, but go and watch it. It's great.
Yeah.
Stuart, The Last Murder at the End of the World is fabulously entertaining. It's dystopian, utopian, futuristic, and you scared me when you said somewhere that some of the things going on in that book are not that far off in our future.
We need another.
Ooh. Yeah, I used to be a technology journalist, so I did that for a few years. One of my many, many jobs. And so when I was... This book kind of came out because it's been marketed here as a... we were talking about this off stage. It's been marketed here as a science fiction book, and I didn't set out to write a science fiction book, so I'm not entirely sure what's happened. I just set out to write a crime book. Like, this isn't... For me, this is an Agatha Christie novel, right? It's got all the... We're both massively influenced by Christie. It's an Agatha Christie novel. It just has this slightly unusual setting, but it does all the things a Christie novel should do. But we go back to that conversation we were having earlier about the mechanics of, I want to trap everyone on an island, how do I do it? So I was having this really schizophrenic conversation with myself, and I don't know if you plot the same way, but it was me saying to myself, okay, I want to trap them on the island, how do you do that? And I'm like, there's a poisonous fog, and I'm like, all right, cool, yeah, sounds good. Why? And it's like, I don't know, but it's killed everyone, so that's bad. How many are left? 122. Okay, right, cool. We're writing an apocalyptic novel. Great. How did the fog get there? And it's like, oh, we invented it, so it's in the future. Yeah, it's in the future. And this is how the novel developed. I kept asking questions. So eventually you get to the point where you're like, you've got the scaffolding of a novel, and it's, yeah, it is a utopian, dystopian, Agatha Christie novel on an island with all this stuff around it. I didn't want it to be too sci-fi. I'm not really a massive sci-fi reader. I wanted it to have... I always describe it as... If you're doing cross-genre stuff, it's not really cross-genre. That's a bit markety. Like, what it actually is, it's a crime book, so that's your Christmas tree, and then there's baubles on it, right? Like, the science fiction bits, the future bits, they're just the baubles on the tree.
Don't tell any sci-fi writers that.
Yeah. Strange,
just baubles.
Yeah, I've not been invited to any of their conventions. But yeah, so I dress it up, and I put the baubles on it. And when I was starting to think about science fiction, because I used to be a technology journalist, I started going back to the old articles that I'd written and the conversations I had about the interesting things that people were working on. And everyone's talking about artificial intelligence now, and there's a bit of that in this book. But that was, I mean, I was having these conversations with people 20 years ago about artificial intelligence and what it was going and what it was going to be. And that's what's in this book, what they thought it could become. That's what this is. All the technology that's in this book is stuff that people were working on when I was a technology journalist. So all that technology is 20 years further along. So it's all coming. Everything that's in the book is based in something. Like, it is where very clever people think our society is going.
Well, that's a bummer.
Let's talk a little bit about your process when you start writing a book. Ruth, you sometimes start with what if? Is that your premise?
Yeah, I think a what if is basically all of my books come from some kind of fear or phobia of... I'm fascinated by the differences in our process. Yours sounds like you're just, talking to your imaginary friend.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to the...
He's not imaginary. No.
The kind of 3 a.m. grim, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you have all the horrors of the day kind of crowd in, and you start thinking, about that awful thing that you said to someone in 1996, and maybe they're still stewing about it. Basically, all of my novels come from either that moment or a moment of sort of fearing something that could happen to me or to someone that I love. Yes, The Woman in Cabin 10 is a novel about a murder on a boat, but what it's actually about is a woman who sees something and is not believed about it. So that's the sort of emotional core of the book. One Perfect Couple, I guess, is a little bit more complicated in that sense because it doesn't have a single what if, but I guess, the sort of the emotional core of it is that my main character does something for love and it turns out terribly badly. And it's a book about how wonderful relationships can be, but also how awful and the terrible things that we do to each other in the name of thinking that we love people, even when perhaps we don't. So yes, I guess the what if is sort of harder to sum up, but it's, a big part of it is what if your partner was a bastard?
That's very good. Your process for writing books, Stuart, sounds more like torture than writing.
Yeah, no, hard agree. I've said that, and we were talking about this earlier, but I find...
Writers should never talk in the green room because it's the most annoying thing when you're like, we were talking about this backstage.
Yeah. And I don't know, it makes no difference to you. I'm sort of apologising to Ruth, who doesn't care. Like, I don't know why I phrase it that way, but I find writing really hard. I find it really tedious. I find it, like, it's not... Everything I want to do with my day is the opposite of what being a writer demands, right? Like, I want to go outside and go for a run. I want to, climb a mountain or go for a swim or sort of like whatever it is, I want to do something. To be a writer, I have to sit down in front of a computer for 8 hours a day and write 2,500 words. If I don't do 2,500 that day, I have to do 5,000 the next day. If I don't do 5,000, it's 7,500. That's the process, a treadmill.
No wonder you... okay, well, I'm going to come in at the end of this. No wonder you hate writing, because that sounds awful. Carry on.
Yeah. But it is, but I throw away entire drafts. So like the first version of this book was 111,000 words. It was completely different and I tossed it. Like it got through in the bin. And it's not like I go back and salvage bits. I throw it, I burn it, it's gone, and I start from a blank page. I do that with every novel. So 7.5 Deaths lost about 67,000 words out of it. That was chopped out. Devil in the Dark Water, the second novel, that was originally... It's now like 130,000 words. It starts off in a little place called Batavia. That's 2 chapters. Then it's on a boat for a big bit of the middle section, and then you're on an island for 3 chapters at the end, right? That's what it was. In the original conception of it, there was 70,000 words in Batavia. There was 70,000 words on a boat, and there was 70,000 words on an island. Yeah, I know. Let's go back to us being dead clever, right? That's not a good way to write a book. So because I know I do that, I have to overwrite, and I have to spend a lot of time overwriting. So I find it really, really hard. So when I'm coming up with a book, I have to make sure there's going to be something every day that can get me to a computer. There has to be something, like an action scene or a knotty emotional problem or a character I can't quite work out. There has to be something that draws me to the screen. Otherwise, I just won't get there. All writers are world-class procrastinators, right? Like, if we don't go... It is basically like, if you don't go for one day, you might as well not go there for a year. Like, it's just, by that point, you're like, but I was making that cake. So, yeah, and that's what it becomes. So, yeah, I find it really torturous. I find it genuinely quite hard.
Okay, so the only part of that I can identify with is that I'm obviously an amazing procrastinator, because all writers are. Literally, every other word of that is... I love writing. Spending 8 hours a day in front of the computer is my idea of heaven. I do not wish to go for a walk. I do not wish to go for a run. I cook for my family because I have to, because they'll bitch at me if there's no supper on the table. Not that bothered about seeing anybody, really. Occasionally make time for, I know, I genuinely love writing, and I don't have a daily target. I just write as much as I feel like, and 1,000 words is it's a pretty good day for me.
Okay.
My longest ever day was 7,500, but that has only ever happened once. I don't think I've ever written that much again. Some days I don't write anything. I delete words, and I think that is as valuable a day. And we were talking about this backstage. I'm just going to say it again to make Stu feel worse. 99% of what I write makes it into the book. I almost never delete. But if you didn't write 2,500 words a day, maybe more of them would make it. Like if you said I'm only going to write 500 and I have to use every single one.
But I can't, because I sort of work out what the book is by writing it. So I plan it, and then the plan doesn't work, and then I've got to write it, So I keep writing it until I work out what the book is and I work out how it all hangs together.
Okay, and I don't plan it.
I hate you so much. I came in here loving Ruth Ware like all of you, but I walk out her arch enemy.
No, but I think the point is we both end up with, you know, books that hopefully people enjoy at the end of it. So your method obviously works and produces a fantastic book at the end of it.
It will just destroy me first. Yeah. No, I do. Like, and what's really interesting is that when I started doing this, I did it on 7.5 Deaths. I had a full-time job. It was like, you know, that wasn't bought by anybody. So I was just working that in my spare time. And I was like, so I didn't know that I had a process. The second novel, I started writing that 2 months before my first daughter was born. Right, so I blamed it all.
That's tough, yeah.
Yeah, it was. So I blamed it all on her. Like and I was just like, oh well, she's just fucked up my life. So like that's why I can't write. It's her fault. But then when I wrote this one, I was doing it all over again. I was like, oh, it wasn't her fault. It's mine. Well, I am the problem here. Okay, I get it now. I see it. Yeah. So so it is, but it is the process, and I think it is just the way I have to work. I have to make a lot of batter to make a cake out of, I think is...
That's a weird metaphor.
It is
and you throwing away.
Just fucking loads of batter. I don't need this batter. I just throw it on the floor. Yeah.
It sounds a bit like if, you know, when people make those rainbow cakes out of like 7 layers of different coloured cakes, it sounds like you're doing it by making 7 individual cakes and then cutting a layer out of each.
Yeah, but they're all the wrong cake. And they're made out of dog food. Like, that's kind of how it feels. I'm just like, why would I make a dog food cake? That's insane. Why would anybody throw that away? Right, this time I'm using flour. Like, it's a very...
A weird part of me, though, is quite jealous because...
Why?
No, I'm not jealous of the actual process, but I think your way sounds much more impressive. Like, my version of, I just sit down and make up stuff and then it somehow becomes a book. It just doesn't sound like the tortured artiste, whereas your way sounds real, like... I would want to buy that book because I would be like, this is the distillation of 24 amazing books, and he's like homeopathy, you know, you shake it and you throw away the water and then you do it. It just sounds like it would make a bloody good book.
It doesn't, right, okay. So imagine you hired someone to build you a wall, right? You've got Ruth, who comes around and is like, I'll build you a wall. All the bricks will be in the wall. And it'll take me 6 months. And then I turn up, who's like, I'll build you a wall. I have to make all the bricks first, and I'm going to make the bricks out of jelly. And then eventually I'll make some proper bricks, but that'll take me 2 years. And eventually you'll have sort of half a wall, but it'll also be a bit of a toilet. Is that okay? Do you want that? That's what we're doing. That's the... Yeah.
I'd love a wall toilet.
Who doesn't love a wall? Every man sees a wall and thinks of toilet.
Exactly.
This has gone very badly off the rails.
Anyway, back to the questions.
Yeah. Please, God, give us a question.
That's not about toilets or walls.
Stuart, each of your books is kind of independent. You don't write series, you don't write sequels. But when I was reading your new book, I stumbled across Blackheath. I thought, wait a minute, maybe there are some subtle connections.
Yeah, but only in the sense that I call this the not a trilogy, because that amuses me. Everybody asks you just get this all the time, like people just always ask you for a sequel, like whatever the book, and it's really lovely. People are like, I enjoyed that book, will you write a sequel to it? And I was like, well, no, because the things that you enjoyed about it, I couldn't replicate, really. Like, you know, 7.5 Deaths, a lot of the things that people enjoy about that book are the surprises and the way it operates. And once you know that, I could never do it again. I could never give you that experience again. So there's no point in me trying. It would disappoint us both. And this isn't my marriage. So, like... So with a Standalone, I'm very lucky that I have my publisher's trust. They let me write whatever I want. The only 2 diktats from them is I've got to have a body and I have to have an investigator. That's it. That's all I have to do. Beyond that, everything's up for grabs. Like the setting, the time frame, the characters. It can be a bit of sci-fi. It can be a bit of 1920s golden age murder mystery. So I can always do standalones, and that's more interesting for me to do. But I grew up reading sort of Ian Banks and Terry Pratchett, and they always have these moments where like a character from one of the previous novels would just turn up in this, and they wouldn't ever do anything. They would just be in the background, or they would mention something that happened in another book, it didn't make that a sequel to that book. It was just a lovely thing for a reader to stumble on and be like, oh, I recognise that. And I like that feeling. And now that I've written 3 books, I can sort of give people that feeling. But I have been thinking about doing that for a long time. So like and because my books are usually about chronology, there are references in 7.5 Deaths to things that happen in Last Murder. Because I was sort of thinking about where all these were going. So they all interlock in really weird ways. But it is more just that sort of like little tingle of recognition. Yes.
Can we take a turn and talk about, you both share a love for Agatha Christie, and Ruth, you'd written something that I thought was really insightful. You said Christie's importance is she conveys maximum impact with a minimum of showy language and imagery. I think that captures.
Did I say that? That's very well expressed.
That's really good.
I have no memory of saying that, but I agree, so I probably did. No, I think she does. I think, I mean, a big part of that is the fact that, you know, many of her best-known books were published during World War II when there was quite severe paper rationing. So there was a literal limit on how much she was allowed to say. So several of her books are really an exercise in sort of getting to the point and giving maximum impact with minimum words. But I used to teach English as a foreign language, and Christie was often one of the kind of first sort of actually full-length adult English language novels that people with English as a second language would read, because she is, you know, she's very good. There's nothing too complicated. Her language is interesting and it's rich, and she conveys herself well. But they're very clear. She expresses herself very clearly. But I think what I love about Christie is the plots, really. You know, her language is wonderful. Her characters are much richer and more three-dimensional than she's often given credit for. But it is the plots, and she just perfected that kind of really high concept sort of twist and that sort of puzzle click. What about you, Stu? What do you?
Yeah, exactly the same. Like when I never intended to be an author. Like I wanted to write an Agatha Christie novel. Like I grew up loving those books. Between about 8 and 12, I read all of them back to back, and they sort of imprinted on me. Like the structure of them, everything you just said, I exactly felt. And I was like, I just want to write one of those. It was just that was my flag in the distance. I just like to write one of those. But when I was trying to work out to write one, the reason why 7.5 Deaths is so wild, and it's a murder mystery in a Groundhog Day loop with body swapping in it, is because that's as far as I had to go, because she'd written all the other Christie plots. Like, Christie completed Christie novels, right? Like, she wrote them all. Like, if you...
Sometimes twice. There's a few of her novels where you can see she was like, I didn't nail that first time, I'll go and do that plot again.
Yeah. And so it's a really interesting thing to try and sort of, like, write a very traditional Christie novel, because it's very hard to put something next to her canon that she's not already done, because she really got to the edges of what she was trying to do, and often brilliantly. I mean, sometimes badly, like sometimes very badly, but often very, very well. The only thing about Christie that slightly annoys me that she's left as a legacy is that she's taught readers, as she got further along in her career, she became, I genuinely believe this, the sort of first industrial author. Like, she was like writing 2 to 3 a year. She knew what her audience wanted, and she delivered time and time again. But what her audience wanted was the final 2 pages of every book, right? That's all they wanted. They don't give a shit about the rest of it. It's just, it's no, but it's true. Like, you get the mystery set up, and then you get an entire middle bit of Poirot working it out, or Marple, or whoever the characters are. But then everybody's just like, don't care, the final 2 pages, you did it. Ah, sweet relief. And then you move on to the next one. And I thought she sort of trained an entire genre of people to be like, you don't really have to care about the book beforehand, you just have to care about the final 2 pages. And that's something like, whenever I'm writing, I'm keenly aware of, like, mystery readers want to leap ahead, I think, a lot of times. And you're just trying to be like, hey, there's interesting stuff on this page. Like, there's other interesting stuff in this novel. Got a few of you like, oh, yeah. See his point?
I don't know if I totally agree with that, but I think that...
Well, I'm leaving.
More than used to, I work in a genre where it's getting a bit less so now, but for a long time there was a massive expectation that every psychological thriller would contain the twist. And it almost became a sort of curse in that people would go into a book expecting a twist, and if there wasn't a twist, they would be annoyed, and you'd sort of think, but I never promised you a twist. And the thing about the twist is that it is enormously vulnerable to social media, because once you know the twist, and often the twist is something that can be conveyed in just one or two words, so it's extremely spoilerable. And I think that the great gift of the twist is that I quickly decided that whether or not my books had a twist, I didn't really care, but I didn't want the twist to ever be the reason people were reading, because if your entire book rests on something that someone can take away with one tweet, there's no point in reading your book after that. So I quickly made peace with the fact that I wanted to write as if every twist or reveal in my book had already been spoiled, and that what pulled you through would be the characters. And so I think I sort of agree with what you're saying, in that I do think when you read Christie books, and indeed a lot of crime books, you are reading for that big reveal at the end. You're reading to find out whether you're right or wrong. But I think as writers, if we're doing our job, that shouldn't actually be the primary reason you're reading. You should be reading because you care about the people in the book, and you passionately want to know they're okay.
Oh, an applause.
I'll take that over an ooh.
We probably should take some time for questions from your audience, and since Ruth ended things so beautifully, and that's a good point to start. So questions for Stuart or Ruth?
Don't be shy.
From the lady in the front.
Okay, so I have to know now, what is like each of your favorite like Agatha Christie books? You have to give one.
Shall we repeat the question? So for people who didn't hear at the back, what is our favourite Agatha Christie book? And I'd like to hear yours as well. And we're only allowed to pick one. We're going to pick the same one.
Probably.
Okay, you say yours, then I'll say mine.
Mine's And Then There Were None.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I do love And Then There Were None, but I was probably going to say Death on the Nile.
Death on the Nile's great. Can I give you my little pet theory about And Then There Were None?
Yeah.
Just before we go on to the next one. I deal in... So if you're writing cross-genre stuff, you've got to understand the genres that you're working in. So I read... If I'm going to do a bit of sci-fi, I like to go back and read a lot of sci-fi books and pull them apart and work out what the tropes are. Same if you're going to do romance, if you're going to do... I pulled apart... When I went to look at And Then There Were None and started pulling that apart, you know what genre it most closely resembles that isn't crime?
Horror?
Slasher movies.
Yeah.
It's a slasher
bit
movie.
of Wes Craven. We all love a bit of Scream.
It's a perfect. So the tropes marry up totally and perfectly.
Final Girl.
To slash. Yeah, exactly. And so it's got the monster. It's stalking them. They're on an island. They're getting picked off one by one.
The moment when the hand comes out the grave.
Yeah. It's a proto slasher movie. Like it completely is. It marries up totally. So if you love And Then There Were None, you probably love Friday the 13th.
And this is Stuart's PhD thesis.
Yeah. That's what I'll be doing the rest of my evening.
Tell us yours.
Pocket full of rye.
Oh, good choice.
Oh, that's a good choice.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a marple in there. So that is a marple, isn't it? Yeah.
Other questions?
Which book was the one that you wrote 7,000 words in one sitting for?
Oh, so the question was which book of mine was the one that I wrote 7,000 words for. Do you know, I actually can't remember, which is awful. I just remember the word count. I think it must have been, it was when I was still working, and my writing days were really precious. So it would have been either The Woman in Cabin 10 or In a Dark, Dark Wood. And I remember talking of Stu's thing about procrastination, I had been messing around on Facebook in various different author groups all day chatting. And I eventually said, okay, I'm going to block my internet and I will come back after lunch and I'll tell you how much I've written. And I turned off the internet, and that was the only time I've ever done that, and it worked. Who knew?
Can I ask a question as well? I've got you. In a Dark, Dark Wood is a brilliant title. How thrilled were you when you came up with it? Were you immediately like, that's a fucking great title?
Yeah, I was, and it was my title, and I did get to keep it, which isn't always the case with books. So,
Other questions? Towards the back.
Which of your books is your favorite? And have you maybe not written that one down?
ooh, so the question was, which of our books is our favourite, or is it the one that we haven't written? Do you have a favourite, Stu?
No, I hate all my books.
Which is
I
your
don't-
least favourite?
No, it's not because I don't know about you, but by the time I finish the book, as we mentioned, I'm genuinely kind of exhausted by it, and I sort of like just push it out into the world, and I'm just like, somebody take this. I don't want to deal with it anymore. So for me, like, kind of once it's gone, there's such a huge relief to it that it's just kind of like, it's this poisoned object that's gone somewhere else. So I don't look back on them with any affection whatsoever. Yeah, but you should all buy them because they're dead good.
Sorry, I'm just having this image of Stuart pushing his kind
Just
of
hurling it at my editor.
poison turds
Yeah.
out into the world. They're wonderful books. Don't listen to him. I recognise that feeling of. I think I always feel like every single time I bought a house, the house that I ended up buying has come along at the point where I just don't give a shit anymore. I just want this process to stop because it
Yeah.
is so awful. I cannot look at another house. I just don't care if it's got 4 walls. I'm buying it, and that's always when I've found the most wonderful house. And writing a book is a lot like that, in that by the time you have edited this thing 49 times, and then the copy editor has revealed to you yet again that you don't know how to use semicolons or spell accommodation, you are just unbelievably sick of this thing. But again, like Stu, I'm going to give the completely opposite answer and say after that, after about a year's time, I fall passionately in love with my books again, and I love them
Aw.
all, and I think they're all the characters, I think about them often. I worry about them. Some of my characters are not in the best place when I leave them. I sort of think of them like Facebook friends that I haven't, been in touch with for a while. And, are they still drinking? Is she? Is her marriage okay? Like, did they get through that tough patch? So yeah, I love all of my books, and it's like being asked to choose a favourite child, and I'm not going to. They're all wonderful and special in different ways.
Oh. We need a big "oh" for that answer. That was really, oh, yeah.
Other questions? Got one, two,
What are your must-haves around you when you sit down to write?
So the question is, what things must we have around us, or writing rituals when we sit down to write?
As I mentioned earlier, I was a journalist, so that for years. So basically, words are money. So you don't have rituals because anything that can stop you writing, if you're trying to earn your living out of it, is a massive problem. So there's a lot of things you get out of being a journalist. Like, I never get writer's block because, again, I was taught to sort of like just sit down and write, because if you don't write the article, you don't get paid. I was taught how to be edited, which is a big thing, right? Like, when you first get edited, if you're not used to that process, it can feel quite brutal because a book is a very personal thing. Whereas, like, a newspaper editor swears at you, red pens your entire article, and then swears at you and kicks you out the office. Like, so I don't really. As long as I've got a computer and an hour, I'm fine. I will get on with it. Like, so usually that's all I need.
I also don't have any must-haves. For a long time, I just wrote on the sofa while my kids were napping. And then it turns out that's really bad for your back, sitting there with a laptop and a baby in one arm typing like that. So I completely ruined my back. Went to the doctor and was like, my back's really bad. And he was like, tell me about your desk setup. And I was like, this light ding, like, oh, a desk. So I guess, so now I keep my work in progress only on my big clunky desktop computer that lives in my office on my desk. And that is really to force myself to sit in a proper chair, properly adjusted with a monitor at the right height, because otherwise my favourite place to write is in bed. And again, that's terrible for your back. So I guess I would say that is my only must-have, is I try really hard now to write at a proper kind of... one of the most expensive investments of my career has been my incredibly ugly Herman Miller desk chair, which cost the best part of £1,000. And I love it. It's changed my back.
I've got one of those as well. It's amazing.
Other questions? Lady in the front.
What can you tell us about what's next? What's coming next?
So the question was, what can we tell you about what's coming next?
In the world, are we talking about? Just like,
Stu thinks we're all doomed. AI is going to create a big fog. There's only going to be 12 of us left by this time next year.
yeah.
I'm obviously writing another book because I always am. Usually I'm happy to talk about it. In this instance, I cannot for secret reasons. So I am writing another book. I will eventually be able to talk about it. At the moment, I can't. But the big exciting news, which anybody who follows me on social media will know, I'm sorry, is Keira Knightley was cast in the adaptation of The Woman in Cabin 10. So that's hopefully coming next as soon as they finally fully start filming and greenlight it and so on. But yes, so that's two exciting things.
That's super good. I am doing nothing at all. I am... yeah, thank you very much. We... oh, that's a fan. Like, don't ever write against Jim. I wrote 3 books back to the back, and they were quite complicated books, and I had 2 children while I was doing it, so I'm quite burnt out. So I'm just taking a year and just stepping back. I'm going to do my lovely US tour and chat to people, and then I'm going to go home, and then I'm just going to lie in the garden for 6 months, I think. Just taking a little break. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm pleased with the way it's going so far. Yeah.
Other questions? Way towards the back.
So the question was whether we know who the murderer will be going into it, or do we figure it out as we go along? Do you want to go first, or shall I go first?
You go first.
So I almost always do know. It's the one... I don't plot a whole bunch, so I think about my books a lot before I start. I think about the characters and the setting. And I always know the kind of the whodunit element of the book. And that's partly because I like to give people a chance of guessing the outcome, and I can't sprinkle those clues throughout unless I know what the outcome is. Pretty much everything else is up for grabs. Who dies often is up for grabs. One Perfect Couple is a little bit different because it's actually not so much a whodunit compared to some of my other books. But it opens with a scene. There's a man and a woman. They're in the sea, and the woman is trying to drown the man. She's trying to kill him, and he is fighting back. And she realizes that if she doesn't manage to kill him, he is going to kill her. That was the first scene that I wrote of the book. It's quite different to the rest of the book. It's in third person, and you don't know who the couple is. You don't know why they're there. You don't know what the outcome of the scene is going to be. So that, I guess, is the whodunit of the book, in that I hope people will be reading to find out why the book ends at this scene. And that scene, I guess, is the kind of... it's the sort of the emotional crunch point of the book. It's the thing that all the characters are working towards. And there is a whodunit element. There are murders, and it's not immediately obvious who's committed them. But the kind of the beating question of the book is, why do we end up here? And what happens? And that was the first scene that I wrote. I knew it was where the book would end up, and it's what all the questions in the book are pointing towards.
Ooh. Yeah, I always do, because I can't start writing unless I understand who died. So I've got to understand who was murdered and why anybody would want to murder them, and that gives me a lot of other characters as well. Like, it's a really weird process, but that's kind of the seed, and lots of things grow out of it. So once I understand who died, I understand what kind of person they were, and why anybody would need to murder this person, and then that gives me the person who murdered them as well. So I've got the 2 most important characters, so I always know going in. I say that, though, with Devil, my second novel, the murderer and the victim changed like 3 times in the writing of that. Because it started off as one type of book and then morphed into another type of book, so it can change. That's the only time I've done it. But Last Murder was from the start, and 7 Deaths from the start. I knew who done it and why and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Got time for one last question? There.
Hi, Ruth. You often write settings that are very vivid and distinct, and include a lot of details with different professions and things like that make it seem very well researched. And you mentioned earlier that it's not necessarily based on having visited or familiarity. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your process is like to bring those things together and I guess make it seem more research than it is.
Oh, great question. So yeah, it's basically how do I fake my research was the question. I mean, I do an awful lot of Googling. So that was The Woman in Cabin 10 was me just watching kind of cruise documentaries. 0 Days, which is set around the kind of career of a pen tester, a security tester who breaks into buildings for a living. Obviously, I have never done that. I'm extremely law-abiding. But that was partly born out of my obsession with kind of tech podcasts during lockdown. So that was an example of sort of having done the research before the idea of the book came to me, and that I was obsessed with this as a subject, kept listening to these kind of hacking podcasts, and eventually realized that there was this whole kind of subspecies of people who did this for a living, and wouldn't that make a great protagonist for a crime novel. One Perfect Couple is sort of half and half in that, as previously discussed, when I started writing the book, I had never been to an exclusive desert island in the Indonesian Ocean, although I did manage to go just in time for the editing process. So again, large parts of that was sort of done from, I guess, just imagination, me thinking, I've seen enough, travel brochures and thought, hell, I'd like to be there with my toes in the coral white sand and my, up to my ankles in the turquoise sea. So a lot of my books are really about me wishing I could be somewhere and creating that experience for myself by way of murder. But a good example of One Perfect Couple also being a giant cheat is that my main character Lila is a scientist, which is obviously a world very distinct from my own, and her role as a scientist is very important to the book. It's a big part of who she is. It's a core part of her character and how she views the world and her place in the world. And that was a giant cheat because she's basically based on my husband, who is also a virologist. And Lila's sense of her ethical responsibility as someone who asks difficult questions of the world and tries to face up to the answers truthfully, whether they are what she wanted them to be or not, is very much based on him and how I think he sees his career. What about you, Stu? Do you have to research? I suppose even though your books are speculative, there must still be a lot of...
Yeah, I mean, for 7.5 Deaths, I went and crept around a massive manor house for like 3 days. Genuinely, it was...
I love that so much.
Oh, it was so good.
Did you murder anybody in a time loop?
No, actually, the manor house was in the south of France, and it was run by a little elderly French couple who spent the entire time, I swear this was happening, telling me that they didn't understand English and then perfectly answering any question I had, but in French. So, they would understand what I was saying in English, and then so I'd be like, oh, have you got any baguettes? And a baguette would appear, and I was like, you do. So I did that for that one, and then for the second one, Devil, I crept around the boat, I went and found a boat. So there is always but I like, again, that goes back to journalism and sort of like the actual going and doing a thing. Like, I don't like research where I sit at a desk and sort of read a book. I like research where I go to a thing and climb over a thing and do a thing. But that house in the south of France where 7.5 Deaths was at, that house was wicked haunted. Like, it was awesome. It was so good. I swear to God, one night I was creeping around it at midnight with a candle. I genuinely did it, right? Because I wanted to feel the shadows. And I heard not a violin, like another one of those big old instruments just playing somewhere in the house. And I followed it through the house and just could never find the source of the music. And it was amazing. Anyway, it was great. Yes.
What a great ending.
You can't top that. I know you all want to get your book signed, so we're going to go ahead and end here. Thank our virtual audience for joining us. Oh, that's right. You have to do your giveaway.
I was thinking that we never know for sure how a conversation with an author will go, but I have to say that pairing them up produces a level of surprise that I hadn't really expected. It's been so much fun. So thank you both. It's been wonderful. Thank you, audience, for being so great. And I did mention that we were going to be giving away what? Oh, they went over there? There There they are. Sorry, John. You're right. They aren't the same. Right. So I have two books since we have two authors. How about that? And the first one is our first mystery book for April or May? No, May. And it's called The Hunter's Daughter by Nicola Savinik. And it's about a girl who escapes from her father, sealed away memories in her conscious mind by a controversial hypnosis treatment. And she's now a decorated sheriff's lieutenant in a rural county, and then everything goes wrong. So I think it's really an interesting book about repressed memory. I know, right? A serial killer emerges who might be copying her father. Do you know, after Silence of the Lambs, there was a whole serial killer surge, but books sort of trend. Then we got the Da Vinci clones, and then we got Gone Girl, and all the rest. And the serial killer is making a comeback. So, I know, but it's just the way it is. So I think we have, is it 73 numbers, PK? 73? Got it. So Ruth, you look like a serial killer addict here, so I will pick you first. Would you pick a number between 1 and 73?
I'm going to pick 72.
Okay, 72? You're probably here unless you ran away. Aha.
Hey.
Okay, so you're going to get this book. Wonderful. I would actually have delivered it after the signing line, but there you are. Oh, he showed proof too. Boy. Okay, and the other book is our crime book of the month for June by Alex Finley, who's a wonderful author, and it's called If Something Happens to Me. He's going to be here on June 10th, and this is a book with a twist. It isn't the only reason to like the book, but there definitely is a surprise in it. And yet, all along, you think you know what's happening, which I love. Anyway, Stuart, 1 to 73 that's not 72.
Okay. At this point, I am open to offers. A little bit of blackmail. Let's have 17.
17? Are you here? That's you.
Hey! Okay, now I admit this looks like a fix. It's not.
Do you know, hilariously, and I have no idea why this is true, but at least 60% of the time, 17 is the number that is called.
Really?
You wouldn't think 17 would be, so when you come in, try to stage it so that you get in line at 17 and that way you get a free book. Anyway, if you will then, first of all, sorry, I didn't thank John, who has done a wonderful job. Let's have a round of applause for John. Anything else you wanted? Oh, we do. Okay, so we actually have two tables, so that'll work out better. But anyway, your job now is to stand up and fold up your chairs, move them that way, and then either wait outside or get in line, however you want to do it. And thank you.